Hello, this video is about Elizabeth's foreign threats. You have already possibly looked at the video on the domestic threats that she faced. We're now looking at the threats that she faced from abroad, and then the final video will be on life in Elizabethan England. So, foreign threats means to do with other countries and the threats that they posed to Elizabeth after she became queen in 1558. And this is looking at the period up to 1588, which is when the Spanish Armada was launched, and as we will find out, England defeated them using back leg. Now, why did Spain launch the Armada? This is a question that's very likely to come up in the actual exam in some form or another. It might be explain why Philip II was angry with England, explain why Spain went to war. There's a whole different set of questions they could ask, and of course there's a 16 marker too. But essentially, whatever it says, you can use beard to answer the question. B-E-A-R-D is the mnemonic that you will use. So, what does it stand for? B is for the beheading of Mary Queen of Scots, which took place in 1587, 1 year before the launching of the Armada. Mary Queen of Scots had been involved in numerous plots and a revolt, and as a result, Elizabeth and her advisors, her Privy Council, had had enough of her and decided that she needed to be executed. However, Philip II of Spain now believed that there was no alternative monarch to Elizabeth in the country and felt that it was his duty to become the King of England in order that he could convert the country back to Catholicism. Secondly, another reason for the Armada being launched is because of economic reasons or to do with empire, both E. The reason is this. So Spain at that time was the most powerful country on the planet, and it was this because of its control over the New World. It controlled huge amounts of North and South America, which gave it huge amounts of wealth through cheap raw materials, including precious metals, particularly gold and silver. However, because Philip II was involved in the Counter-Reformation, he was not prepared to give any rights to Englishmen to collect materials themselves, raw materials in the New World, and so Elizabeth had a plan. She decided to provide licenses to sailors to allow them to become pirates and to steal from the Spanish galleons. And these sailors were called privateers, and they set out to the Atlantic and they stole from Spanish galleons as they returned from the New World with huge amounts of gold and silver. One of the most famous of these men was, of course, Sir Francis Drake, who stole £400,000 worth of gold and silver from Spanish galleons between 1577 and 1580. And to make Philip even more angry, when Sir Francis Drake returned to England, Elizabeth, rather than being angry with him for stealing, she was actually, of course, delighted with him, and she knighted him for his services to the country, causing huge amounts of anger in Philip, who of course felt humiliated that a fellow monarch was treating him in this way. Next up is A for aiding the Netherlands. Aiding meaning helping. The Netherlands is in the north of Europe, very close to England. However, it was controlled during this time period in the 16th century by the Spanish. It was a Spanish colony. Spanish is a Catholic country, of course, but it controlled the Netherlands, which is a Protestant country. As a result, Queen Elizabeth felt that it was her Protestant duty to try to help the people of the Netherlands, and she did this in two ways. Firstly, she supported the Sea Beggars, and the Sea Beggars were Dutch Protestant privateers, and she did even more. You can look in the booklet to find out how she supported the Sea Beggars during the issues over the Genoese loan. Additionally, she started a proxy war with Spain over the Netherlands, and she did this by encouraging two of her favourites, two people who she flirted with and who were under the belief that they would become king, possibly. She flirted with these men and convinced them that they should fight on her behalf. So a proxy war is when someone fights for you. These two men were prepared to fight for Elizabeth in the Netherlands, and they were the Duke of Alençon, who is a Frenchman and a powerful Protestant noble, and the other man was Lord Dudley, who is an English noble. Both men fought unsuccessfully in the Netherlands. However, Philip was convinced that if he did not take action, that one of these proxy wars might eventually lead to the Spanish being overthrown and removed from the Netherlands. R is for religion. Philip II was leading the Counter-Reformation, trying to pressure Protestant countries into becoming Catholic again. And of course, the most powerful of the Protestant countries was England. So he wanted to overthrow Elizabeth and to place either himself or someone else on the throne who would make the country Catholic again. Next up, and final reason for the launching of the Armada is the actions of Sir Francis Drake. Firstly, as we've just already heard, his actions as a privateer, stealing huge amounts of gold and silver from Spanish galleons. And secondly, when he in 1587 singed the king's beard, which means that he did this. He went to a Spanish port called Cadiz and he set fire to 30 of the ships in the Spanish Navy, the Spanish Armada, set fire to them, destroyed them along with supplies and barrels. This was, of course, outrageous to King Philip II, and he felt that he needed to take action, which he did the next year by launching the Armada as a way of getting his revenge. Now, why was England able to defeat the Spanish Armada? It could, of course, be a question like, why did the Spanish Armada lose? It could be phrased differently. It is a surprise that the Spanish Armada lost because Spain was the most powerful country in the world and it had the most powerful and largest navy. So it is a surprise that England was able to defeat them. But they did for the following reasons. One, BA, is to do with barrels. The Spanish had an issue because of the singeing of the king's beard. They had issues with their barrels. The barrels were used to supply or to store food and water on board their ships. The barrels that were made after the singeing of the king's beard were of an inferior quality, and so the food that was stored in them went rotten, and as a result, after a few weeks at sea, the sailors were beginning to starve because their rations were very, very thin, and as a result, morale on board the Spanish Armada inside the Spanish fleet was very low when they went to battle. Next up, C is for communications. This is one of the key reasons why the Spanish lost. The Spanish ships, as we know, were large, and one of their key tactics was to go alongside enemy ships so that soldiers could then jump on board the enemy ship and fight and take over the ship that way. This was very difficult for the Spanish to do because they had the Spanish fleet, which left from Spain under the control of the Duke Medina Sidonia. However, most of the soldiers were in the Netherlands, because that's where they were fighting, under the control of Duke of Parma. And it was very difficult for these two dukes to be able to join forces. And as a result, there was far more time for the English to prepare their own fleet and therefore defeat the Spanish because the issues that the dukes had with communication. Next up, another key reason for the English defeating the Spanish Armada was that Elizabeth was able to ask experts to provide leadership in the naval tactics. And she did this because she felt able to delegate. She was a woman at a time where women were not expected to know much about naval battles, and so she delegated to privateers who were experts in fighting the Spanish because they had been doing so for years, particularly Sir Francis Drake. So it was experienced naval leaders from England against Philip II, who was providing the overall strategy and tactics for the Spanish and knew much less about how to fight against another country's navy. As a result, The English won, partly because Sir Francis Drake in particular came up with tactics that included the use of fire ships to set fire to the Spanish galleons, and Philip II didn't have the tactics to be able to respond. Finally, you've got another reason why the English won was because of their galleons. The Spanish galleons were bigger and were considered by most people before the battle to be better, but actually the much smaller English galleons turned out to have the advantage because, looking at the pictures in the middle, they were more manoeuvrable, which meant that it was easy for the English to set or to use their cannons, which could fire 6 times faster than the Spanish galleons. So they could fire their cannons off and then maneuver themselves out of the way of the Spanish ships so that the Spanish had less time to respond. And it also meant that as a result of this speed of the English ships, it was not possible for the Spanish galleons to go alongside the English ships and board them. And as a result, the English were able to win the battle. So, English tactics were the main reason the Armada was defeated. How far do you agree? So agreeing, obviously, will be relating to tactics. And tactics is not part of back leg, so you have to find those tactics from somewhere, and you can find them within LE and G. So you've got tactics, which means the ideas they had at the time to win the battle, and the tactics they had was to use fire ships and also to use the cannons, to attack with cannons and then to use their greater manoeuvrability to move out the way. That's one of the reasons why the Armada was defeated, but you could also disagree. And if you were disagreeing, you would use the barrels, because obviously the singeing of the king's beard and the destruction of the barrels was a key reason, because it led to lower Spanish morale. You could also talk about the key issue with communications between the Duke of Parma and Medina Sidonia, which meant that it was very hard for them to join forces and gave the English extra time to prepare. And in a conclusion, you could argue that tactics were important, but however, perhaps you could argue that it was Spanish issues, because the barrels and the communications both reflect problems that the Spanish faced, and say that that was the main reason why the Armada was actually defeated. And that is that.